Hello and welcome everyone. Very happy to have you again. Today we're going to study one of the lessons of communication that you have in the first year of BAC. This lesson is making advice. So here we have two parts, or we have two communicative situations. The first situation, which is the situation in which you give advice. And the second situation, which is a situation in which you respond to advice. But before this, we're going to study how you can ask for advice. So as I told you, this lesson is addressed to first BAC students with all the streams. This lesson is presented to you by teacher Mohammed Stacy from Safi. So let's get started. First of all, let's read the following dialogue. As you can see, this dialogue is between Sarah and Sophia. Sarah, I feel so tired these days. What do you advise me to do? Sophia, oh, I'm sorry for you. I advise you to see the doctor. Sarah, you're right. I will go as soon as possible. Sophia, if I were you, I would go now. Okay, so here as you can see, we have two characters. We have Sarah and Sophia. So, if I ask you, what's the matter with Sarah? Of course, you will answer me, she is very tired. If I ask you again, what does Sarah ask for? So as you can see here, Sarah asks for advice. That's why she says, or she asks, what do you advise me to do? She's asking for advice. Why? Because she is sick, because she is very tired these days. And what about Sophia? In this situation, Sophia gives the advice to Sarah. And that's why she says, or she responds, I advise you to see the doctor. Sarah is responding to this advice. You're right. It means that Sarah accepts the advice of Sophia. That's why she says, you are right. I will go as soon as possible. But Sophia has another advice. Okay? Has another piece of advice. Sarah, if I were you, I would go now. So she advises Sarah to go now, immediately, because she is very tired, because she has a very serious sickness. Great. So, if I ask you, how many communicative situations we have here? Here we have the first situation in which Sarah is asking for the advice. That's why she says, what do you advise me to do? She asks, what do you advise me to do? And we have a second situation in which Sophia advises Sarah. That's why she says, I advise you to see the doctor. And here we have another situation in which Sarah responds to Sophia. But Sarah here accepts the advice. Okay? And here we have the same situation that we have at the beginning, which is giving a piece of advice. Great. So let's see first, what do we mean by advice? So when you advise someone, it means that you give him some guidance or you give him orientation. Okay? So when you see that there is an idea or there is an action that should be done, to fix to solve a problem, to show the way for someone. So we say that you advise someone. So advising someone or making advice is to show, the orientation or to give guidance to someone who is in need. For example, when you see that one of your friends is sick, you may advise him or her to go to see the doctor. So this is a kind of guidance, or it is a kind of orientation. The advice or making the advice in general comes through two situations, two important or two basic situations. The first situation is asking for advice. And the second situation is giving the advice. But pay attention, after you give advice, this advice can be accepted, can be refused, as we're going to see. So let's see the first situation in which you ask for the advice. Great. Here we have some examples, as you can see. So let's start with the first example. It is the same example we have just seen in the dialogue, which is, what do you advise me to do? If you have a problem, if you have a health problem, for example, if you are sick and you don't know what to do, you may ask one of your friends, or you may ask one of your family members, or one of your relatives, or anyone. So you can use the question, what do you advise me to do? So this is an expression, this is a structure that we usually use to ask for the advice. Great. Let's take another one, another example. What should I do? This is another one, okay? It is the same case that we have when you have a problem, okay? When you are lost, when you don't know what to do. For example, you are sick, okay? You find it difficult to do something, okay? You don't understand something, for example. So you can use, for example, what should I do? For example, what should I do to fix this problem? I don't understand physics. What should I do to understand physics? So in this situation, you are asking for advice. Great, let's see another example. What ought I do? Okay, what's, for example, here, this one is having the same meaning as should. What I should do. Sometimes you ask this question if you have a problem or you have a certain kind of troubles. For example, you are sick. Let's see another one. What's your advice? Sometimes you can give this simple question in which you have to use here advice, which is a noun. Okay, so here the advice we see is the noun, and here we have the verb, which is advise. With S, it is the verb. Noun is advice and the verb is advise. Great. So we can use this form, or we can use this question. For example, what's your advice? Okay, so of course when you have a problem or when you have a trouble or something like that, and you're searching for a solution, you're searching to solve your problem, so you can use this question. For example, what's your advice? I have some problems with, for example, with my classmate, with my brother, for example. What's your advice, or what do you advise me to do? So if you were me, what would you do? Sometimes you put yourself, okay, in the position of someone who has a problem, for example, or you invite someone to put himself in your position. For example, you have so many problems, and you invite someone, for example, to put himself, okay, or themselves in your position because you are having so many problems. For example, if you were me, what would you do? Okay, so this is another way or another expression or another question that we use in order to make or in order to ask for advice. What do you think I should do? Okay, what do you think? What is your opinion? Okay, do you have any idea? Okay, so here this is another way, okay, another expression that we can use. Okay, what do you think I should do? For example, you cannot understand physics. You have so many problems in understanding physics. What do you think I should do to understand physics? What do you think I must do to overcome this problem? What do you suggest? This one is used to ask for suggestions, but sometimes we can use it to ask for advice too. You can say, what do you suggest? Do you have any idea? If you have a suggestion, so please give it to me. Great. So these are, the main expressions that we can use in order to ask for the advice. Great. Of course, we have other expressions. You may search for them, but these are the most common and frequent ones that we use. Let's go to the second situation in which you give the advice. Okay, so here we have some expressions with some examples, as you can see on the screen. Let's take the first example. If I were you, I would go to the dentist. Okay, so here the structure, it is the structure of the conditional type 2, okay, and it is also used to give the advice. Okay, so here, as you can see, we have an example. Okay, you give a piece of advice, which is going to the dentist. Why this person should go to see the dentist? Because he is sick. Okay, so if I were you, sometimes you put yourself, okay, in the position of that person who has problems or that person who is sick. Okay, that's why you can say, if I were you, okay, I will go to the dentist. Okay, if I were you, I would stop smoking. If I were you, I would practice sports. If I were you, I would eat a healthy food, for example. Okay, why don't you go to see the dentist? Okay, this is another way. This way is also used, or this expression is also used in order to make suggestions. Okay, here we use it also to make advice. Why don't you go to the dentist? Okay, why don't you practice sports? Why don't you, for example, eat healthy food? Why don't you revise your lessons? Why don't you sleep early? Why don't you do something in general? Okay, let's take the third example. You'd better brush your teeth regularly. Okay, so here the advice that we have, as you can see, is brushing your teeth, okay, regularly. Okay, this is an advice, but how we can advise, how we can use this advice, how we can give this advice by using this expression, you'd better brush. But pay attention, after better, we have the base form, which is brush. It means that it is incorrect to say you'd better to brush or you'd better brushing. This one is incorrect. Pay attention. Here we have to use the base form. For example, you'd better, okay, play, you'd better practice, you'd better eat, you'd better revise, for example, etc. Another one, you ought to or you should avoid eating sweets, for example. The example that we have here, or the advice that we have here is eating sweets. Okay, great. So here the expression that we have used is ought to or should. Okay, remember that should and ought to, both of them are modal verbs. They are used for the same purpose. Okay, they have the same meaning. Great, so here we can say, or we can use this expression in order to give advice to someone. If you take my advice, you will go to the dentist. Okay, if you take it, so here we have a conditional sentence, as you can see. We can use the conditional statements, as we have at the first example, in order to make advice. Okay, so if you take my advice, you will go to the dentist. So the advice that we have here is going to see the dentist. Okay, and the expression that we have used is if you take my advice. So this is another one which is a polite expression. Okay, and remember that you have to be very polite when you give the advice. It might be a good idea to brush your teeth on a regular basis. Okay, so here, as you can see, so the advice that we have is brushing your teeth. Okay, and the expression that we have used, it might be a good idea. Sometimes we can use this form, we can use this construction. You can say it might be a good idea, it might be a fantastic idea, for example, it might be a beautiful idea, etc. Okay, good. So here, this one is also used in order to make the advice or to give the advice. I advise, pay attention, I advise, because here we have to use the verb, okay, subject, verb. I advise you to. So after the verb advise, we have to use the infinitive form of the verb. I advise you to practice sport, to eat healthy food. I advise you to, for example, sleep early. So here, as you can see, we have the verb brush. The advice that we are giving in this statement here is brushing your teeth. Great. And the expression that we have used is I advise you. So this one is a common expression. It is a frequent expression that we usually use in order to give advice. Another example, which is the last example that we have today here, have you taught? Have you taught? So here we can use, we have to use the present perfect, or we have the present perfect. Okay, this one is a form of a question. Okay, but at the end we should have a question mark. Okay, so don't forget to put the question mark at the end. Okay, so have you thought about seeing a dentist? Okay, have you thought about practicing sports? Have you thought about eating healthy food, for example? Okay, so you use the interrogative form of the present perfect to make advice. Okay, you start with the helping verb, have. After this, you put the subject, and after this, the past participle of the verb think. Okay, and you give the advice you're going to make. Okay, so these are the main, I think they are the main expressions that we use, that we commonly use to, give the advice. Of course, there are many other expressions, there are many other ways you can search for them. Great. So I told you before that when you give advice, when you give a piece of advice, this piece of advice can be accepted, can be refused. Okay, let's see how you can accept advice. When someone gives you advice, okay, how you could accept it. But when you respond to advice, you must be very polite. So before using these expressions, you have to say thank you. Okay, so thank you for your advice. So here we have some expressions that we can use to respond positively to a certain piece of advice. So as you can see here, we have the first one. Thank you. Okay. Yes, I will do this. Okay. For example, when someone advises you, for example, or I advise you, for example, to practice sport, you can respond to this advice by saying, for example, okay, yes, I will do this. Okay. Or you can say, thank you. You're right. I must do this. Okay. To show that you accept the advice. Great. Or yes, I must do this. Okay, I must practice sports, I must eat healthy food, I must sleep early, I must revise my lessons, I must do something in general. Yes, I should. Okay, I should do that. Okay, I should do what you have just said. Okay, so here, this is another way that you use to show that you accept the advice. Why not? This one is used to make suggestions, but it is also used to make or to respond to advice. When you say to someone, why not, it means that you accept, okay? It means that you don't refuse this advice. Okay, that sounds like a good piece of advice, or that sounds like a beautiful, okay, a great, a wonderful, fantastic piece of advice. It means that you accept, okay? You have, and it means that you have accepted the advice. Great, so these are some of the expressions you can use in order to accept a certain piece of advice. Let's see another case. It is the case in which you decline, or in which you refuse the advice. Great, so here we have some examples, but remember that you have to be polite. Okay, so let's see the examples that we have here. It's a good piece of advice, but I think it is better too. So you show that the advice given to you is a beautiful advice. Okay, it is a beautiful piece of advice. Okay, it is something that you can do it, but there is another idea that you can do which is better than the first idea that is given to you by this person. Okay, it's a good piece of advice, but I think it's better too. Okay, here you put a verb, okay, the base form of the verb. It's better to sleep early, it's better to practice at home, it's better to watch an American film, etc. I like your advice, but it seems I can't make it. Okay, so your advice or your piece of advice is beautiful, is beneficial, is helpful, but it seems to me I can't make it, I can't do it, it's impossible for me to do it. Okay, sorry to say this, but I don't think it would be a good idea. Okay, thank you, sorry sorry to say this to you, sorry. Okay, so you show your sorriness. Okay, so when you refuse something in general, you have to show that you are sorry, or you show your sorriness. That's why you say, sorry to say this, but I don't think it will be a good piece of advice. Okay, of course, because you have another idea, you have something else that you can do it, and that is better than the piece of advice that is given to you by this person. Excuse me, but I have another plan. Excuse me, but I have another idea. I have something else. Okay, so remember that you have to be polite. Excuse me, sorry, etc. I'm afraid to say this, for example. Okay, but I guess it doesn't matter. Okay, so here you show that this idea is not a good idea. It's not that beneficial. It's not that helpful idea, because you have another idea. Great. Okay, so these are, the most common expressions that we use in order to ask for advice, to give advice, to accept advice, or to refuse advice. Okay, so things that we have to remember about asking for and giving advice. Okay, so here you should always remember that advice with the S is a verb, and advice with C is a noun. Okay, for example, here my father gave me this piece of advice. So here we shouldn't use a verb, okay, because here we need a noun. That's why we have to use C. It is advice. Okay, great. So now let's practice. Okay, we don't have much time, but let's go. For example, if I ask you what's the matter with this girl, you will say she has a cold. She has a serious cold. Okay, so put yourself in the position of this girl. So you will say, I have a serious cold. So you may ask for advice. Okay, what do you think I should do? You see, this is an expression. Okay, it is an expression that we have just learned in the first part of the lesson. Okay, let's take this one. Okay, if you are, for example, this person, you will say, for example, I have a fever. For example, my head hurts me. Can you advise me? Can you advise me? This is another expression you can use to ask for the advice. For example, this one, you see, this one, he suffers from obesity, and you can say, I suffer from a very serious obesity. Will you give me a piece of advice? So here in this situation, you are asking for the advice. Okay, let's see other situation in which you give the advice. For example, you may give a piece of advice to this girl. So now that this girl has a serious cold, so what does or what she must do? Okay, great. So if you want to give a piece of advice to this girl, you will say, I think you should visit the doctor soon, or I advise you to visit the doctor soon, etc. Okay, let's take another example. For example, this one. Okay, this person has a fever. Okay, so his head hurts him. Can you advise him? For example, you can say, if I were you, I would take a fever reducing medicine. Okay, so this one is a kind of advice that you give to this person. And here we have a very special expression, specific expression, which is, if I were you, I would, plus the verb. Okay, so these are, the most important parts of this lesson. Thank you for watching and see you again.